Alright, what's going on? Today we are going over FOI Task B, the learning process. Starting with this one because it is the longest by far. All the information out of this came from the Aviation Instructor Handbook. And I'm pretty much just going to be going down the line items of the ACS. So starting out, what is learning? What is the definition of learning? There's a bunch of different definitions that the instructor handbook kind of goes over. So I've kind of made a conglomerate definition that kind of takes all of them, takes parts of all of them, and puts it into one. That's a definite. Which is a permanent change in behavior or action based off of experience or training. So the gist of what it kind of outlines is that learning is the tangible difference that you get after going through an experience or being taught something by an instructor. It's going to be measurable, so you should be able to measure how much they have learned, and it's not so much, they have the knowledge in their head, they listen to you, but it's how they act after that in both their behaviors, so their words or their actions. So that is a definition of learning. So now that we've established that, we can get into some of our more deep topics, starting with what I would consider is the deepest, is learning theory. So learning theory as it applies to aviation, there are two main ideas that the FAA incorporates into the instructor handbook. The first one, which is also the simplest, is going to be behaviorism. So behaviorism is essentially Pavlov's dog. If you've ever heard of that experiment, the gist of it is that you can predict future behaviors or actions based on past rewards or punishments. And that's going to be a common theme throughout here. I'm going to refer to that a lot. But past rewards, well, I'll say behaviors that received positive rewards are going to be most often they're going to be past behaviors that resulted in positive outcomes are going to be most often repeated. So, for example, student does good, you give them praise. That praise made them feel good, so they're going to be inclined to repeat that action. It's the same concept. Going back, Pavlov's dog is the experiment where he would ring a bell, give the dog a treat, ring the bell, give a dog a treat. Eventually down the line, he rings the bell and the dog salivates. It's kind of outlining that reward or punishment system that predicts future behaviors. So that's behaviorism. The second big one is cognitive theory. Cognitive theory as a whole is very broad. It's a very in-depth theory, but the gist of cognitive theory as a whole is that it focuses more on what's actually happening in the brain versus just what's happening on the outside. So why are you getting these behaviors versus you're going to get these behaviors because of X, Y, Z. In the instructor handbook, it outlines it outlines a bunch, but there's two that really stand out to me that seem the most important. These two things I see, the concepts of them I see repeated throughout this chapter, so I'm going to outline those. For one is information processing theory, which essentially says your mind acts as a computer. So it receives information, it codes that information, it stores it, and then it retrieves it when it's needed. And you'll see where that comes into play later. And then secondly, we have constructivism, which outlines that new learning has to be built upon old learning. So to be able to learn new things, you have to be able to attach that to older, already learned things. You have to build. You can't just learn how to do steep turns. You have to first learn how to, stay straight and level. Then you have to learn how to do a standard rate turn, holding your bank. Then you work your way up, building off of the thing before to eventually learn that new skill. Now I'm just checking to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yes, okay, so that is a very brief outline of learning theory. You can go a lot more in depth to it, but this is what I think is going to be the most important and what will come up the most later. Okay, next we have perceptions and insights. So what is a perception? A perception is going to be the basis of all learning. It's an important definition. It's the basis of all learning. So everything that you learn as a student is coming from your perceptions of the environment around you. Well, how do you perceive the environment? Well, it's through your five senses. So sight, smell, feel, hearing, etc. Through those senses, your mind takes in the information and relates it to concepts that you have already known or pre-existing concepts, and determines the value of that information and then codes it from there. We'll get more into that later. But for now, all you need to know is that a perception is the perceiving of senses and the process of giving it meaning. Insights is taking those perceptions, those senses that you receive, grouping them into and grouping them into meaningful wholes. So it's taking different experiences, you could almost call it, but taking different perceptions and making the connections between them to create the bigger picture. It's taking the pieces of a puzzle and doing the puzzle to make the picture that it creates, I guess. That is where the real learning is in the insights. Yes, you can have perceptions and you can, make assumptions about this. So if you perceive a nose down attitude and you're scared of heights, you see the ground coming towards you, that's scary. But if you take that and group it with other things, it can make a bigger picture. That was not a great explanation, but you get the idea. So a big thing here, factors that affect your perceptions. So obviously there are going to be both internal and external things that are going to affect how you perceive what's around you, which will then affect how you learn. So for that, we use an acronym called G-STEP. First, we have goals and values. I kind of touched on it before, but whenever you perceive things, your brain assigns a value to that thing. It depending on what your preconceived values are and what your motivation for being there is, will determine whether you see those perceptions as important or not, which will determine if you keep them long term and actually learn. So if your values value what you're doing, it gives meaning towards training, then you will be more inclined to keep those perceptions. Number 2 is self-concept. This is a big one that I've especially noticed in my personal flying career, is that a positive attitude directly affects how well you can learn. Having a negative self-esteem or negative self-confidence or a lack of self-confidence directly affects how you perceive what is going on around you and how you store that information. Things that lead towards you having a negative self-concept, you're not going to retain as well, and you're not going to value those perceptions. After that, we have time and opportunity. For this one, the main idea is that you have to have time to learn. You're not going to go up and do stalls and learn how to recover from a stall the first time you do it. Or I say, if you go up your first flight lesson and you do stalls, you might be able to do a stall just by pitching the plane up, but you don't really know what it means to recover because you haven't had the time to experience, regular flight. So you got to have the time, an appropriate amount of time, to be able to build up your experiences that lead to perceptions, so you can build upon those perceptions. Sounds a lot like constructivism. After that, we have element of threat. if the student feels threatened, they're not going to learn. It's just straight up, they are not going to learn well. Which is unfortunate because for a brand new student, an airplane is a pretty threatening environment, especially if you're afraid of heights, or if you're just scared in general. I mean, flying in a little metal object is not as comforting as flying in a big metal object. So anytime you feel threatened or they feel scared, they're not going to learn. And the perceptions that they perceive at that time are going to be negative. And then lastly, we have the physical organism. I know we haven't talked about it yet. I haven't made a video on it yet. But basic human needs. It's Maslow's hierarchy. Those needs have to be met before you can learn. Which is what this is outlining, is that your needs, that's not right, that's wrong. Physical organism is outlining the need to feel and hear, use all of your senses in order to gain these perceptions. So if you are a student and you're learning how to do a maneuver, and the instructor is constantly taking the airplane, is constantly saying, let me show you this, let me show you that, not really letting the student fly. Yeah, they're hearing and they're seeing, and you know, they might be understanding what's going on, but they're losing the feel. They're not feeling what they're supposed to do. So it's eliminating a sense, which affects their perception. So they won't be able to fully learn the maneuver. Okay. Next, and that's perceptions and insights. Sorry if this explanation is wrong. Next up, we have acquisition or acquiring knowledge. So how do we acquire knowledge? But more specifically, what are the levels? What are the categories of knowledge? For that, we have an acronym. It's called MUA. So we're going to use that. So firstly, we have memorization. That's going to be the same thing as rote knowledge. For acquiring knowledge, I'm going to use the example of learning Thespians. Okay. So for memorization, that is knowing BY 75. That's it. That's memorization. Understanding is having the rote knowledge, but also understanding what it means. So that's going to be VY is 75, and that's our best rate of climb. It allows us to climb to a certain altitude in the shortest amount of time. That's understanding. And then lastly, we have the application stage, which is having the rote knowledge, having the understanding, and then being able to apply that to situations to solve problems, I'd say, or complete the task is a better phrase. So in our example, there would be a student going out and they get an ATC call and they're like, I need you to expedite your climb to avoid traffic. Well, they would know that BY is their best rate of climb, and that's what they need to use to climb at the, fastest time. Which in that scenario, you'd actually probably use VX, but you get the idea. They apply that knowledge to situations in order to complete the task. So that's acquiring knowledge. Next up, we have the laws of learning. Laws of learning. I'm actually going to go set that tracker. So, the laws of learning, we have six universal laws that apply to how we learn and what's the most efficient way to learn. For this, we have another acronym, surprise. It is called REAPER. Number one, we have readiness. The law of readiness. What that means is essentially, are your needs met and are you motivated? As an instructor, you can motivate your students. You can do that by explaining the positive things about what we're learning, why it's important that we're learning this. You can come up with ways to motivate students. Can you necessarily meet the basic human needs of students? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You can definitely give it your best effort if there's a student that's really in need. But sometimes you can't really control that. You can't, give them self-actualization. But you can motivate them. So making sure that they are ready to learn and motivated increases the efficiency of their learning. Next, we have effect. So, while I'm talking about this, tell me what this reminds you of. Effect is the law that is stating that the effect of a behavior is most often repeated, or a behavior with a positive effect is most often repeated, which sounds a lot like behaviorism. It all connects here. Next, we have exercise, which is your use it or lose it law. Basically saying things that are most often repeated, things that are repeated, things that are practiced a lot are most often remembered. Next, we have primacy. And I'm going to put a star next to that one because that is considered the most important one. This one has the biggest effect on students and how well they learn. Primacy states that things learned first often stick the most. So if you are an instructor, you have to teach them right the first time. If you teach them wrong, it's a lot harder to go back and relearn something than it is to do it the first time. Because that first time you taught them, whatever you taught them that was wrong, is really hard shit. Next we have intensity. This states that real world, dramatic or intense scenarios are retained better than the opposite. So going out and flying and doing spins is going to stick more than sitting in a classroom and listening to a lecture on spins, which makes sense when you think about it. And then lastly, we have recency, which is kind of similar to exercise, but it's just stating that things learned most recent are better remembered. Those are the laws of learning for you. Alright, up next we have domains of learning. So what are the different domains, aka what are the different types, we could call it? What are the different types of learning? So for this, got another acronym. It's going to be CAP. And I'm going to space this one out because I actually got it. So first we have cognitive, which is thinking. Then we have associative, which is feeling. And then we have psychomotor, which is doing. Thinking, feeling, and doing. Each one of these has their own subcategories or levels, if you will. So for cognitive, I use the acronym, I'll put it over here to the side, RUAC, which I came up with these. They're not the best, but I'm able to remember. So you have rote, understanding, application, and that says correlation, which sounds a lot like acquiring knowledge, which we just went over. It's essentially the exact same thing. Rote is memorization, understanding, application, and then we add on here correlation, which is connecting two ideas or two or more ideas and correlating them with each other. Next we have associative, which I use au revoir. I'm going to start it over here. Awareness, response, valuing, organization, and integration. The handbook is kind of vague on what they mean about this. It kind of just says like, yeah, for the associative domain, you just go from awareness and then to response and then valuing. So it doesn't really explain what they're talking about. How I think of it is like listening to what other people tell you. So if you're a student, listening to your instructor. You're aware of what he's saying, you respond to him, you value what he's saying, either you do or you don't, and then organizing what he's been saying to you, what he's been teaching you, and then actually integrating what he's been teaching you into your own actions. That's how I think of it. Again, could be wrong, but they don't really hit on that very much. And then lastly, we have psychomotor, which I use OIPH. Don't know why I'm able to remember that, but I can. And so for that we have observation, imitation, practice, and habit. So this is going to be your instructor showing you how to do something. How I think of it. So you're watching your instructor perform a maneuver. You imitate them to the best that you can. You really don't understand it very much, but you're just doing what they did. Practicing that maneuver, and then you practice it so much it becomes habit. So that's how I think of it. And that's all I got for domains of learning. So that's just kind of outlining the kinds of learning and the levels of those different types.